Good morning, Joanne Freeman, Dr. Freeman,
Hey,
Professor of History. It's getting more and more elegant. How are you? How
for
was your
very
run?
early in the morning. Pardon?
How was your run?
Someday I actually thought about it this morning. Just showing up with sneakers in my hand on my way to my run. Yeah.
Well, I went with Town Mouse and Country Mouse you guys don't know this, but Joanne and I had lunch together like a few days ago. I was in New York. And now I'm back in the rural America. So it's hunting season here. And
It is country mouse and city mouse.
That's right. And I suspect if I walked through New York, of course, you walk through New York, nobody looks at anything you wear. But I laughed the one thing that was to laugh about after January 6, 2021 was how many people were like, where did they find those matching ball caps that all had that neon orange? And I'm like, okay, it's hunting season. Like, I could get those literally at the teeny tiny store down the road from me. So yeah, it's the time to wear your hunter orange. One of my favorite knitting companies actually now produces wool, American wool, in hunter orange, which I think is the smartest idea.
It's smart, but it's also so now, right? Yeah. It's like I'm sitting at home watching Netflix, knitting my
in hunter orange, right?
Yeah.
So, anyway. So speaking of how are things orange?
Make that segue, Heather.
Actually, you're right. There you go. I didn't think of that. The whole orange thing. Yeah, we always say we want to see people in orange. I wasn't reading this.
I didn't think of that. I was just like spitballing here. So
well, there seems to be news coming out of New York.
There does seem to be news coming out of New York. The interesting thing, and I'm officially a Connecticut person. I'm in New York a lot. And watching,
the only time I ever associate with Connecticut is that story about the thermometer.
Oh, and the Battle of New Haven.
Yes. And honestly, now that I've said that, this is one of my all-time favorite U.S. history stories, and that's not what we're going to talk about, but it is Saturday morning. And it's such a cool story. Could you tell people that story before we actually talk about what we're going to talk about? It's like literally my favorite story you've ever told.
Wow. It's now you've got the way too much hype for this story. But I just love it. It's Ezra Stiles. It's the president of Yale College. During the American Revolution, there was a battle. Actually, there was a Battle of New Haven, which I discovered teaching my American Revolution course. And I went to look at his diary to see how he was responding, which was fascinating because, he can see a British ship not that far, and then he sees people getting off the ship, soldiers, and he sees them coming. So he describes this whole sort of, fear, and then he's trying to prepare. So he sends students to various different towns. He takes files and things and moves them, and he begins to move some of the furniture and things he cares about. And what it said in his diary, and I had to include it in my lecture because it was just too good. He moved his table and he said something along the lines, I'm not going to do it justice. I broke my Fahrenheit thermometer. I've had it for a long time. And it was just like, the world is on fire around him. He's like, my Fahrenheit thermometer.
I love that though, because it's so human. And it's what I have heard for people who go through real trauma is that you do fixate on, your house burned down. Oh, there's a smudge on your chin, and I just love that all the American Revolution, he's got to take care of the students. He's got to take care of, all this stuff. And he's like, I broke my favorite thermometer.
I know. That's why I included it, is because particularly if you're teaching like the founding of the revolution, you have to emphasize the fact that they're just people right in the mix. But that detail is just, yeah. Anyway, thank you.
All right, that was a rabbit hole, everybody, and I made her do that. But I just love that. The revolution is so big, and so it's so hard to get your hands around. And Stiles being like,
I know that's the correct facial expression.
Yeah, just does it for me. All right, so that wasn't what we were going to talk about.
No. What we wanted to talk about, you led us off in that direction about things in New York, and Rosie is banging her food dish, just so you know that that's the noise happening over there. And what we were sort of touching on before we came here was the absolute fear and obsession with Mamdani in New York, and the degree to which different kinds of people, not just in New York, are terrified of him and what he represents, and how they're already blaming him for doing things, and he's not in office, right? He's like, oh my God. The last ridiculous one was he's going to force people to learn Arabic numbers. It's like, yeah, those would be our numbers, but thank you very much. So anyway, just the idea of all of the fear attached to Mamdani, and then that was set off by the image that I saw yesterday on all over social media of Trump smiling up at Mamdani because the two of them met and seemingly had a very more than collegial, happy pals kind of conversation. That was sort of where we wanted to start this morning.
So let's just start with that image itself and the fact that Trump was happy and jolly and laughing and touching Mamdani a lot. And I just want to point out that he did the same thing the day before with Mohammed bin Salman Al Saud, the crown prince of Saudi Arabia. And I think that's a Trump issue. There is, his demeanor has changed, and my take on Trump is that he is mentally falling apart. And so
that's so striking because he's someone you never or almost never see smile and laugh, right?
Totally.
So those two things, those images, and I hadn't until you mentioned that this morning. I had the image of the Mamdani sort of beaming look on his face, but you're right, this sort of happy, touching, hand-holding thing with the big smile on his face. That's not the way he really ever appears.
No, and I'm not a doctor, so I will not speculate further, but it was very, very striking. But what's of more interest, as you say, is Mamdani, and more than that, the things that people project onto him, and that so I was saying to you, and we don't have to start here, but it really struck me to the point that I actually started writing a piece about it. The degree to which the freak out over Mamdani mirrored the freak out in 1860 by elite Southerners, enslavers, the elite, the very rich enslavers, their freak out over Abraham Lincoln, and this projection of all the things that Lincoln was going to do to destroy them. And I think all the characteristics of those two people, Mamdani and Abraham Lincoln, are very different. And I'm certainly not comparing. I'm not saying that Mamdani is the next Abraham Lincoln at all, because what we're looking at is the people who reacted, how people reacted to them. But I think in both cases, and this is where, I don't know, let's see what you think, Joanne. I think in both cases, what the freak out is over is that it appears that Mamdani, at least part of the freak out, that Mamdani, just like Lincoln, is going to rein in the very, very wealthy. And their freak out over that is, to them, that's not just, I'm going to pay slightly higher taxes. To them, that is, you are going to destroy the United States.
I think that's true, but I would even push that a little further. And in a way, it's projection, right? In the same way that last week we talked about how Marjorie Taylor Greene, like the Greenometer, and that you could, sort of look at her and see how people are responding to her, says a lot about where we are. In a way, there's something similar here, which is people are projecting who they are and what they want and don't want onto these people. And what they're doing has far more to do with who they are than with who this person is, right? So you're right. The very wealthy in New York are like, he's going to take things away from us. He's going to make us share. No, we don't want to share, right? So
that's a great line, Joanne. That is he's going to make us share. That is great. All right, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt that, but man, that word share we don't see enough of. And I just, as a former mommy of 3-year-olds, that's an important word.
And that word gets wrapped up with, socialism. Like, oh no, we're going to have to share. We're going to have to communicate and cooperate. We can't just have what we want. So the part of the freak out, actually has less to do with Mamdani and the fact that, again, he's not in office. He hasn't done anything yet. And the things that people have already claimed that he's done, it would be comical if it weren't so disturbing. But it's people projecting what they want and who they are and what they're afraid of. And Mamdani has just offered that kind of opportunity. So yeah, I think people are afraid he's going to destroy America, New York. The world will explode with this person. Why? Because he's going to take away things I want, things I feel I'm entitled to.
Well, but that's really interesting because, in fact, most of what he is embracing is actually quite popular among the vast majority of us. And, one of the things I thought was really interesting is he has hired, as part of his transition team, Lena Khan, who used to be the head of the Federal Trade Commission under President Joe Biden. And Lena Khan is, I've been watching her for years. She's so freaking smart. But her big thing is protecting consumers and protecting workers and creating a system in which you can't have these giant monopolies, because starting in the 1980s under Robert Bork, the United States really began to focus on any kind of combination is fine so long as it temporarily, it's important, lowers prices for consumers. We don't care about the environment. We don't care about labor. We don't care about neighborhoods. We don't care about pollution. We don't care about any of that. Well, she is going back. That's a really radical interpretation of the way that businesses should be able to combine. She's going back to the previous version, which started in freaking 1890 and lasted until the 1980s, and saying, no, we're not gonna let people combine to the point that they hurt workers and they hurt, and all that stuff. And the fact that he's, it's so interesting now because Khan did a lot when she was in office that no one paid any attention to. And now that she is back in a really prominent place and in a place where it is possible that she actually will get another foothold, most Americans, and I don't say that lightly, actually quite like the idea of protecting workers and protecting the environment and all those things. And yet that's not what, people are hearing. He's going to ruin everything.
No, but I think those are directly one after another, right? Most Americans like these ideas, and thus they're even scarier.
Yeah.
Right? It's like they don't want these things to happen. They're bad things. Most people like them. Oh no, right? It's even worse. So not only do some people consider these, we have to share radical ideas, but they're popular, right? We live in the midst of a moment when there are a lot of things that are popular that people don't want to be popular. People in power don't want to be popular, right? And that's scary, because that is about the people having power. That's fear at the fact that the people have power, and that ultimately, if we like or don't like something, it can really matter. And folks in power know that.
Well, that's so interesting about the attacks on him as, this socialist in neon lights with daggers and targets and all that.
They're orange.
Sorry. But the whole concept in the United States of socialism is not the international socialism that was an economic system. In the United States, beginning in 1871, after the Civil War, the people who started screaming about socialism in 1871, it was everywhere and then continues up, were people who said, we don't want poor Americans voting because they're going to vote for things like roads and schools and hospitals. And the only way you can pay for that is taxes on property. And we're the ones who have all the property. So this is a redistribution of wealth. And so socialism is really about politics. We don't want poor people voting because they're going to vote for stuff that is good for everyone. And we're the ones that are going to have to pay for it. And it comes back down to that. I don't want to share. But the weird thing about it is, there's many weird things about it, but is that, roads and schools and hospitals don't just benefit the people who are using them in that moment. Those are actually infrastructure that are good for everybody. It was
help business.
Well, that's right. Well, and even if you're not using the hospital immediately, you're going to.
Right.
And you need roads and you need schools and you need all that stuff. And that screaming about him being a socialist, Americans always read onto that. This is going to look like, some communist country. But what they're really saying when they complain about socialism is that they don't want poor people to have a say. But back to your point, it's we the people, baby.
That's where the fear comes from, right? I mean, so all of the things that we're saying here, describing the dynamics of the fear, is true, but the ultimate root of it is the things that are being said are popular. I mean, he won the office, right? They're popular. And that's the most frightening thing of all. And that's frightening because ultimately we have the power. And people who are used to claiming that power, partly because of their influence and money, that's a very scary thing.
It is. And you know, there's a direction that I would love to go with this, but I'm not going to, because we don't have enough time. I will say that people are calling that out in a big way lately, and that's, maybe we can do another day. But I want to go back to what I keep insisting to you is your real specialty, and you don't listen, but that's okay. I don't take it personally.
as recently as several days ago, you really gave it a college try.
So, you know, we are talking about how people are perceiving Mamdani as either a socialist or somebody who's going to help or whatever. And of course, there is a very key reason for the way people are interpreting that. And you were talking about that before we went live. And that's the way the press is portraying him, that this is what shapes public opinion.
Right. Absolutely. And I am gonna write a book about public opinion. I am.
All right, stop the presses. Stop the presses. You know what? She's probably just trying to get away from me. But come on, isn't this like waiting to happen? You know,
well, people have, even here, right, on our conversations, every once in a while, you're like, that book she's gonna. I will. I tell you, I'm swearing. I'm swearing with my weird little shirt that yes, I'm going to do it. But anyway, I took us off the track. Where were you headed?
I'm interested in the press, because you were saying about that. This is the press, and I want to go into what that looked like in the 1860s and in the 1890s. But in this moment, go for it. Oh, look, excellent, Joanne.
I don't have comments on, because I know I'll get distracted and start talking to you guys, and I'm supposed to be here right now. But excellent, Joanne. No, well, really, the press. I think we, as goofy as this is going to sound, the press is supposed to be serving us, right? And it gets so lost in access that we forget that the point of what the press is supposed to be doing is looking for patterns and revealing patterns and giving us information, which is not necessarily what they're doing. They always, in one way or another, clearly are shaping narratives and creating stories, and in some cases, desperately trying to create controversy of some kind. So yeah, the press in some ways has been very much particular outlets creating a Mamdani that they would like to exist because they don't want him to exist, and they want people to focus on that, and they want people's politics to shift in that direction. We could talk about the press all the time, but I think part of the Mamdani factor has to do with the press deciding what the narrative should be, and that's what we see. And if we don't think about it, we're absorbing that.
So I want you to talk more, if you would, about what you just said, which really jumped out. The press is supposed to inform us in a democracy. They're supposed to work for us. And honestly, that's not a concept that comes up a lot when you think about the press nowadays, when we talk about access narratives and about, the stenography or whatever. And I'm not saying that all press does that. There's some fabulous journalists out there. But what does that mean, that the press is supposed to work for us? And that has got to have come from the early republic, right?
Absolutely. And I'll say, I talked about this a lot on my podcast yesterday. So you can go and find that.
Tell them where your page is.
Well, now that's on my YouTube page, my YouTube channel. You can go and find it. I think the title that I gave it was The Piggy Problem, but it wasn't about the piggy thing. It was about the attack on the press. And so I was talking about the press. And part of what I was talking about was just this, which is from the very beginning, the founding and the founders and founding generation saw how geographically dispersed the nation was, how in the heck are you going to run that as a country? And in a sense, the press became almost a branch of government, but not to serve the government, but to connect the government with the people. So I'm Thomas Jefferson. Sorry about this, Heather, but Jefferson, very early on, 1792, says that if the press doesn't have access to what's going on in Congress, Congress will be the most corrupt body on the face of the earth, because the people need to know what's going on, that those bodies need to be held accountable. So the idea of the press was, given that accountability and the accountability of our government and power holders to us is a core part of any kind of democratic government, the press becomes the mechanism of allowing that to happen. And that's always been an assumption. We just lose track of the fact that, yes, the press is a business, newspapers are a business, they get bound up with capitalism, et cetera, but at their core, their job is to inform us. Now, from the early days in the Republic, it's not as though newspapers were objective. It was the opposite. They were all partisan. Party leaders paid for them. People knew that when they read the newspapers. Regardless of that, they were still in the mix trying to engage with the public in one way or another, not aiming back at the politicians. And the press knew that it had that power sometimes in a positive way. So there's a story I always like to tell about one particular congressman, and we're talking like 1840, who didn't like these two particular journalists and began threatening them on the floor. You guys, you're liars, you say horrible things about me, et cetera, et cetera. So these journalists, these two of them, did two things. Number one, they armed themselves. So one of them got a knife and the other one got what he called a big stick, which is probably a hickory cane. But they stopped reporting him. They erased him.
Oh, wow.
So he was gone. He wasn't in Congress because without them putting him there, he didn't exist. And he ultimately apologized. He backed down. He apologized to them. That happened more than once in this time period. The press had that power and they knew it. And there is a blunt demonstration of it. Well, you know what? I think about that all the time because I think about some of the things that we're constantly seeing. What would happen if the real threat there was, well, we're just not going to report?
Oh, if we did that to Trump, he would cease to exist.
That's what I'm saying.
He was created by the media. So just there's some things in the back of my head here. I believe it is still true and has always been true that newspapers and things that convey news and maybe just on paper, I'm not sure, are not taxed.
Well, certainly from the beginning, newspapers were not taxed. They weren't charged postage between editors. Again, because the idea was news needs to flow somehow, and newspaper editors can communicate with other newspaper editors to spread that kind of news because it's politically vitally important in any kind of democratic government.
Well, and part of that too, I think, as I recall from our mutual friends' work, that part of freedom of the press was access to channels like the United States Postal Service, because the freedom of the press and freedom of speech doesn't matter if you don't have access to the channels that actually will enable you to be part of that. And that whole idea of access is exactly, I think, what you were just saying when the guys just said, well, we're not going to report on you. He loses his access to the press and he ceases to exist.
And he loses his access to us, right?
Yeah.
By losing his access to the press, we don't see him anymore. He's gone. So that's the threat, right? Is that the press can, if they choose to, just stop reporting nonsense, if they choose to.
So, so we're really, it's interesting because in the absence of that kind of reporting, though, it does open up the ability for people to create a false narrative. Right. So to go back to what people were saying, what certain reflections on Zoran Mamdani were saying, and I compared that to the 1860 election, the election, not the men, but in that election, the Southerners in the United States simply refused to accept Northern newspapers. And they burned them. They made sure that, and Lincoln, if you think of the early years of the early months, not even years, the early months of Lincoln's election, he first of all, they kept saying, tell us, that you're not going to do all these things that we believe you're going to do. And he kept saying, no, I said it all during the campaign, and I'm not going to compromise my presidency now, because he's not going to be inaugurated until March. It's March 4th until FDR. And then his first inaugural, when he talks about, Southerners, this is on you, this is not on me, please reflect, don't take us into war. What he's really saying is, I said this stuff 16 ways from Sunday, and you never reported it and you never saw it. This is not on me. I can't make it better if you're not going to listen.
Right. So, and in a way, maybe the way that we sort of move towards the end of our comments this morning is the reminder that when we're reading newspapers, they're constructing narratives, and sometimes they're very deliberately and misleadingly constructing narratives, and sometimes they're actually just reporting what's out there, but that it would, I get to say the word behoove, it would behoove us to remember that when we're reading things in the press, that what are we reading? Are we reading a constructed narrative of some kind? And if we are, what is the story that we are being told? Because they are appealing to us in one way or another. They are trying to get our attention in one way or another, and they have different motives in how and what they're telling us. And so as we are news consumers, and again, bearing in mind that the news, the press is supposed to be serving us as part of the democratic project, we would do well to actually think about what is the narrative being woven, even as we're reading and digesting the news.
Well, I just love that construction as they're supposed to work for us. That is, the question of who is being served by this particular narrative is I think a really important way to think about it. Because if you think about the many narratives that are out there, one of them is that especially right now, is that the United States needs law and order. And the only way for there to be law and order is for the state to stand behind the people who have the most property.
Right.
And anybody else is I'm going to say SOL, right? And that's not a narrative that serves a lot of people. It serves a very small number of people. And
it's the people who don't want to share.
What really shocks me about what we do is how much of it, often people seem to think that history is some mystery that, that we, spend, we dig out stuff like in the Lord of the Rings, when Gandalf is down under the Minas Tirith or wherever he is, and he's going through all the dusty papers with a pipe, by the way, and a candle, which
I won't even go to National Treasure and the fire and no.
Oh, I love National Treasure.
I know, but they keep having fire and lemon juice around documents. It destroys me.
yeah, but it's so much fun. It's just so much fun. Anyway, but really an awful lot of what we do is bringing normal human interactions and applying them to the past and saying, basically what you're seeing here is human beings trying to get power, or human beings trying to run away from the law, or human beings just trying to get by. And when you think about it that way, as opposed to some great mystery, yes, I think it is so much more accessible. And maybe that's why I liked your Ezra Stiles and his thermometer so much. Right. But basically, we're just talking about people being people in the past and now.
In a different moment, with a different culture, with all kinds of different things floating around them, admittedly. But in the end, they're people making choices. And if we forget that, particularly with the founding period, when the founder folk were always, saying we're not special, we're not special, right? If you think we're so special, then the narrative of American history is going to be straight downhill, because you'll never reach us again. And that's not the way it is. So yeah, the human factor and the fact that we, the people, are the humans that fundamentally matter the most in any kind of a democratic country, that should be front and center all the time.
And that seems like a great place to leave this. Thank you very much, Joanne. That was a lot of fun.
That was a lot of fun. We said at the beginning, let's find something fun to talk about. And we
Great.
had even more fun than we normally have. And we always have fun.
That's because of Ezra Stiles.
And the thermometer probably is.
All right. Let's go face the day. And
the apples. I'm heading off to the farmer's market and Gary the apple man.
Well, I'm making an apple pie. So we've got the apple thing going on here.
Well, yeah. Okay. Country mouse, city mouse.
That's right. There you go. All right. Well, thank you. Let's do it next week. Are you good? Oh, it is Thanksgiving weekend, but let's talk. I think it's Thanksgiving weekend, isn't it?
Next Thursday's Thanksgiving, yes.
Okay. My kids will probably still be asleep, so.
Okay, we can do this.
That's right. I got the whole family coming in. All right. Thanks, and we'll plot. And as always, it is an extraordinary pleasure. Love you,
Heather.
Talk to you later.
Okay.